What's up, y'all? You're listening to the Extra Point College Football Podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Carnes, joined as always by my co-host, Daniel Hammock. Daniel, we are back, and it's time to do our fourth annual
Yeah,
off-season pod.
Time to
Who's back?
talk about who is back. Sorry.
No. You go
cut
ahead.
out. All right. Sorry about that. Yeah, dude, it's time to talk about who's back. We do it every year. Who's back rankings. Something we coined. Teams every year ask, are we back? Is this team back? Fans of the teams, media are clamoring and begging, will this team be back? You know, you always hear college football is good when this team is back. Are they back? How do you rank that? How do you square it? We do our best to do it right here. Everybody's on somewhat of a different metric. College football is uneven. That's how it's built. That's how it's designed. No matter how much you try to put this into a formula and make a 12-team playoff into a 16-team playoff, whatever you try to do, it's not quantifiable. It is an uneven sport, and that's what makes this thing beautiful. So, who's back? We're going to tell you. We're going to rank them.
Find out.
We're going to have different criteria to a certain extent for each one, but also a guiding light overall to kind of group these teams together.
Yeah, so this is the fourth year in a row we've done this. It's our favorite segment because it's original. But we found 8 programs who have not won a championship, not just in the playoff era, but pre-2010. And honestly, the most recent one is 2005 on this list. Well, we'll get there. But the 8 teams we have ranked for the last 4 years are, I was going to try to do it alphabetically because I have them here in my rank order. I'll just go random here. We have Tennessee, Penn State, Notre Dame, USC, Texas, Michigan, Nebraska, Miami. So all teams who have had a championship ceiling at some point in their history. They've won championships in their program. But people are always asking. I mean, Texas is the prime example of people asking, is Texas back? You know, Sam Ehlinger, 2018, they beat Georgia in the Sugar Bowl, and he's like, we're back, you know, and it's always the Texas question. But we're like, there's other programs that people were like, hey, is Miami back? When they were cooking, they were cooking. Nebraska, some historic teams, like, are they back?
Right.
So we rank these teams on their backness level every year. You and I do. It's something we love doing. Last year, I was just looking at it earlier. So, Daniel, last year, your order of backness was, I'll go in order here. 1, Michigan. 2, Notre Dame. 3, Penn State. 4, Tennessee. 5, USC. 6, Texas. 7, Miami. 8, Nebraska. I have a feeling at least one team on there is going to make a significant jump, because it's the same team that'll make a significant jump on my ranking. So last year I had 1 Michigan, 2 Notre Dame, 3 USC, 4 Tennessee, 5 Penn State, 6 Texas, 7 Miami, 8 Nebraska. So pretty similar with our list. That we were a little different in the middle there, but Daniel, I'll give you the stage as far as who's back, and we're going to talk about what it means to be back for each program, because I do think it's different in 2024 what back looks like for each program. Some of these teams, I think, absolutely still have what it takes to win a national championship, and maybe that's how we define what back is for them. Other teams might not think what we think has what it takes to win a national championship right now, and back might look different. But for 2024, Daniel, who's back?
Yeah, I mean, just going off of this list, Jacob, I think it's time for us to graduate 2 of these teams. I'll be honest with you. 2 teams are back. All the way back. Nothing can stop me. I'm all the way back. They are gonna come off this list. By my estimation going forward, they are the number 1 and 2 team of the list. Number 1 being the reigning national champion Michigan Wolverines, a team that has won the Big Ten 3 years in a row, has beaten Ohio State 3 years in a row, The only question they had left was, can they win the big one? I think they won the big one in the Rose Bowl by beating Alabama,
Yep.
and obviously they win. I probably would have been ready to graduate them off the list even if they lost the Natty to Washington. I say probably. I don't know. I'll never have to know
I would have graduated him.
because they did win the game. And yeah, they're probably going to take a significant step back. They lose their coach. They lose 18 guys to the NFL. That 18 guys in the combine is the highest number ever. All that to be said, program-wise, the consistency that has been laid the groundwork, and they've reached the mountaintop. We'd be remiss not to graduate them from this list. They are officially back. We can check that box. They're going to still be ranked in the top 5 or 10 next year, even with all of the attrition of the draft and the coaching staff and everything. So Michigan, number 1, is back.
Michigan's back. They're number 1 on my list. I have these teams in 5 different tiers, even though it's only 8 teams. But tier 1 for me was Michigan, and the number 2 team, I'm assuming that we're also going to graduate together. Everything you said about Michigan, 100% agree with. They won the national championship, won the Big Ten 3 years in a row, beat Ohio State 3 years in a row. They've recruited decent. It's gotten better. They ascended. I mean, number 2 on my list, I'm assuming it's the same on yours, is Texas.
Absolutely. Texas, we had different criteria for them. There's some Texas fans out there that are probably believing that, which is fine. You should believe this, that a national championship is back for you. You and I both argue, hey, I mean, 2005 was a great year where they won the national championship, but as far as their, consistent stance in the state of college football, back for us would be winning a Big 12 title and being in pursuit of a national championship.
Competing for a national championship.
And they were in the playoff, and they had great odds. They beat Alabama this year. I have a lot of check boxes for them.
Yep.
Very high trajectory, great recruiting, great coaching staff, developing NFL talent. Sark has the program on the rise, at least at what we can see.
Yep.
I don't need them to win a national championship for Texas to be back. So I am marking Texas as well back, and they are graduating off of this list going forward. We will not be checking their backness next year.
And entering the SEC this year, Texas also has the second best national title odds for 2024. That's just Vegas odds, but Vegas is saying this team has the second best odds to win the national championship this year. So, Texas is for sure back. The way they've recruited has been elite. Sark has built a program to be sustained, and we talked before we came on and said, like, hey, is it sustained enough to graduate them? And I'm like, I think we're just shoring up that they won a conference championship. They did it, which we said that would be back, competing for national titles year in and year out. I just don't see – everyone got onto us last year, Daniel, and said, well, Texas always loses these games. And I'm like, well, Texas was always losing like a lot of games. They've never been here. Like where they're going now. Like their 3 championships were 1963, 1969, and 2005. So going on the road and beating Alabama, winning the Big 12, as you should. Like they checked every box saying, we're doing exactly what we should be. Now they're entering the SEC with the second best odds in the conference and the second best odds for the national championship. So Texas is back. They're here to stay. Sark's built himself a program there. And my tier 1 were those 2 teams, and we're going to graduate them. So congratulations to Michigan and Texas. Those programs are officially, they're back. Man, what a great 4 years. 4 years, look at that.
And it's a graduation. Yeah. Some of these others
graduated on time.
Some of these others don't have the credits to graduate.
That's right. They need some help.
But Michigan, Texas were on track. And, it didn't look great for Texas for a minute. But then they kind of weaved their way back, and they finished strong in senior year. So great job to both of them.
That's true.
On their way back, finish. Man. That's all you need. C's get degrees, but you gotta get to the playoffs. So great job, both of those teams. I didn't put mine necessarily in tiers, but I definitely agree with you that there's a gap because now we're talking about teams that aren't quite back yet, but they have impressed, so maybe they moved up the list, or maybe they're just better than the rest. So my next team, Jacob, did move up from last year. It actually just swapped places with the team behind it. I have Tennessee at 3. I think based
Really?
on what I expect of them, they won 9 games last year. Big finish. I think trajectory is big for me. A big finish for them against Iowa. Say what you will about Iowa's offense. Their defense was allegedly supposed to be good. And Nico Imaliva just had a great game and really just led that offense to a 35-point win against 35-0 is definitely a big deal. I know it's a bowl game. You factor in all of those things. Heading forward, I'm not saying that they're going to regularly be able to beat Alabama. I am putting out there that Nick Saban is no longer at Alabama, and it's not quite the daunting look that once was that they're looking up a hill at Alabama. They're by no means on even playing field, but I think they have a little bit more slack than they did previously based on what has happened. I also think that they've been standing on a pretty solid ground with their coaching. There's so many years there. I mean, Jacob, since Philip Fulmer, it just felt like no one believed in their coach. This is the first time that I feel like the fan base believes in their coach. With having Josh Heupel past few years, I think that's a very big deal. Obviously, being able to recruit a 5-star like Nico and like the trajectory of what he's going to be able to do. They're not going to have to play Georgia every year going forward with the new structure. So some things are really going to look up for Tennessee. They have to continue to play Alabama, but it still remains to be seen how this is all going to square up if they're going to end up playing. Anyways, I say all that to say they won 9 games this year. They won 10 games last year. For them is going to be competing and getting to this 12-team playoff since it's a little more loose and being the top 3 or 4 in the conference. I think they're there. I think that's if not there, I say they're there. They're closer to there than other teams are to their ceiling. So let me pause. They haven't gotten back yet, but they're on their way back, and they're further on their way back than some of these other teams might be. So, yeah, I've got Tennessee at 3.
You said something. I was like, where do I have them right there? So you said top 3 or 4 in the conference, and you think they're there. I would not have them in my top 4 in the conference as far as state of the program. I'll say, which we've also done on this podcast.
And I think that I kind of misspoke. I think that that's attainable for them being top 4 in the conference, but I'm not saying they're there yet. Otherwise,
like that's a ceiling.
They would graduate from the list if they got to that stage. So
okay,
I kind of put both of them together, and I should have had them separate. That's
no. You're good. I was like, really? I'm like, that seems high. So I have Tennessee. I had them last year at 4. I actually dropped them 1 this year. I have them at 5, and they're in my tier 3. Tier 2, I have 2 teams. I have them tier 3. So back for me for Tennessee, I agree in this new era, it will be competing for and making the 12-team playoff. I think back would be like you're in the 12-team playoff conversation every year, and you're making it like every 2 out of 3 years. We'll be back. Like that's like Tennessee at its ceiling to me. Is like, I'll be lenient. I'll say 50% of the time you're making the 12-team playoff.
Okay.
I think that's fair. Is like you're in the top 12. Like, you know what? No. I'm going to still go back to 2 out of 3. Because if you're telling me, Josh Pate, friend of the show, has said Tennessee has everything it takes to be successful, just like they did when they won the Natty in 98. I'm like, okay. Then yeah, you should be making the 12-team playoff every 2 out of 3 years. So with that, I have them at 5. And I think the reason is the teams I have above them, I'm going to say, are more consistent. So 3-year running right now record 7-5, 10-2, 8-4. I'm like, back to me is like that 9 to 10 win range. So 2 out of the last 3 years not reaching 9 wins outside of a bowl game, which I'm not going to count. for any team for what it's worth. Um,
Fair.
like I'm like, okay, like you're still like you're getting more consistent or hypo. It's year 4 now. Let's see it. Let's get to 9 wins again in this new structure. So again, Tennessee, not bad. They had the one hit wonder year. Let's be hitting 9 wins every year. Like 9-3 to me consistently would be a lot more back than they are right this second, if that makes sense. So
That's fair.
recruiting has been actually take a step down, and having Texas and Oklahoma hurt them in the SEC rankings because in 2022 and 3 they were 15th and 12th nationally, which both ranked 5th in the SEC. This past year, the 13th nationally, but 8th in the SEC. So hard to recruit in the SEC, man. You might be, I mean, literally top 13 and 8th in your conference. That's the new world SEC right there. So I've got Tennessee at 5. I'm going to go, Daniel, to my 3. So this is the top of my tier 2. I have 2 tier 2 teams. Penn State. Penn State, I think, is one of the most underappreciated programs in the country. And here's why. They just go 10-2. And if your comeback is they never beat Ohio State or Michigan, my return is going to be what's their ceiling? Because I think their ceiling is right under those programs. Now, then you might say then, is Penn State back? I think now in the new 12-team era, Penn State should be in this 12-team playoff like every year. Like the 12-team playoff was made for Penn State to go and lose to Ohio State and Michigan by a touchdown, and then they're like the 9th seed. I mean, like they are ripe for the plucking as like maybe it's the 8th seed and they're hosting a first round playoff game, and it's a whiteout and it's at night and it's nuts, and they're gonna go like beat the heck out of whoever it is at the 9th seed. Dude, they've just been consistent. They only lose to Ohio State and Michigan, and they're usually keeping it close. So they their consistency has impressed me. They've recruited better. Obviously, last year they wanted to do more with Drew Allar and like years as offensive coordinator. They brought in a really underrated OC this year from Kansas. Can he develop Drew Allar into a better QB? We'll see. But I think what James Franklin's done at Penn State is underappreciated, because I think when people who don't like James Franklin hear other people like me be like, yeah, he's a good coach, I think what they hear is he's one of the best coaches in the country. Not what I said. I said he's really, really good. Like he's a top 10 coach in the country. And Penn State's going 10-2 consistently. What other programs are going 10-2 consistently? Not a lot. So that's my Penn State at 3. I think they're underappreciated.
I can respect that. I had them at 3 last year and I dropped them to 4 this year, just behind Tennessee. My reasoning, Jacob, I agree with you as far as they're a better program than Tennessee by far. I don't think that that's a question. For me, their consistency almost hurts them with their backness, because I think for me, their backness would be winning one of those games every few years. I'm not saying every year, but every 3 years or so, winning one of those games. And in the 12-team playoff era, I agree, making it every year. But for them to be back, for me, they don't have to win the national championship. What I'm saying is, in this 12-team era, they need to be making it to the semifinal game 1 out of every 3 years. And if they do that, and that's making it to essentially the top 4, I think they're further from doing that than Tennessee is from doing what I said, which is essentially a top 4 SEC team and, making the 12-team playoff relatively consistency and, like being in the discussion. I think that's why I have them where I have them. I agree with you. They're a better program. I think that you kind of see them hitting their head squarely on the ceiling, because even the bowl game they play Ole Miss can pierce the ceiling. They're not strung up by that. They have some guys that can win those kinds of games. Penn State, when they go up against the better competition, I mean, they've got guys all over the NFL. Every year they're bringing guys out of that. The front 7 is just sending guys to the NFL. And, they keep in this era. And I don't want to diminish what they are because they're a great, very good team, really well coached, really good players. But for me to get them back, I think that they've got to do something like that. Again, I'm not saying they have to win the national championship. I need them to be in that close discussion. I feel like the way that nature of which they're hitting their head on the ceiling is preventing them from even being in the discussion because they're losing those two games every single year, and they're always going to be that afterthought, And so it just is what it is. I have a lot of respect for them. Obviously, once we've graduated these two programs we already talked about with Michigan and Texas, really, you think about it, that means they're number 2 on my list when you think about it because they're the second most back team of the rest. But they can get there. They're just not. It's just been difficult for them because of their consistency. We maybe have higher expectations for them.
So I'm curious. Penn State ceiling versus Tennessee ceiling. Penn State, you said making the semis how often?
I said 1 out of every 3 years getting to the semifinals.
So,
So
do you think
essentially getting into the top 4.
Penn State is a program higher ceiling than Tennessee?
Right now, yeah. Absolutely.
I'm saying as a program though, like not ignore right now. I'm just saying like resources, location, conference, money, finances, like
they're both in elite conferences, check the box. As far as like
I'd say Tennessee's got more funds.
Yeah, but also access to recruits. Tennessee has to go national for it. Penn State, while they're not they have, Philadelphia, there's places in Pennsylvania, there's places in Ohio to go get players that I think can more regularly sustain success for them. Tennessee has to almost reinvent the wheel every year with you can't survive just strictly on Tennessee. You have to go up in, Kentucky, Ohio, you have to go national, you have to go down to Georgia, you have to go, obviously to Florida. So it's tough, Tennessee, as far as a recruiting base. It just is what it is as far as the overall, the state of the program, but also the ceiling. Right now, I do think that Penn State has a higher ceiling because they're both playing second fiddle to bigger programs in their conference. So they have several stacked on top of them. But yeah, I mean, I think the proof is kind of evident. Well, okay, we're talking about ceiling, not floor, respectfully. So I got you, but
well, that's where I'm like the floor hasn't fallen.
Like if Penn, let me put it this way: if Penn State caught a legit QB, like a legit dude that's going to be an obvious NFL, like either star or like a guy who's going to get drafted, in the first 3 rounds, and they got a guy that could do that, I think that he could make more of a difference there than Nico is going to make for Tennessee. And I know that's not necessarily the question you're asking, but they're in a position to catch lightning in a bottle if they got it. Then Tennessee has to have so much happen, and they have to count on, Penn State is already sitting on top of the shoulders of everybody other than Ohio State, Michigan in the conference. So they just have to win those 2 games. So I almost think it's a 2-game season for them, which is why I would consider their ceiling higher. Tennessee potentially could have or they could have play themselves. They could have Alabama, Georgia.
See, but there's you put Penn State in the SEC. Where do they rank as a program? Like I'm putting it behind Bama, Georgia, Texas, LSU.
They lost Ole Miss.
At least.
They beat Auburn a couple years ago. They lost Ole Miss. It's tough. I mean,
so and this is where it's a fun conversation because they're different on our list because we're defining backness different. Like I think Tennessee and Penn State have very, very similar ceilings. Therefore, Penn State's been more consistent. Therefore, they're more back. But then you're saying Penn State has a much higher ceiling. Therefore, not as back. So again, goes back to what is back for these programs. But that's my tier 2. Or, well, no, I haven't finished my tier 2. Just kidding. You've got Michigan, Texas, we've graduated. Tennessee, Penn State. Who's at your 5?
I have Notre Dame.
Notre Dame. Okay, that is my number 4, which is in the same tier as Penn State for me.
I think it relatively goes without saying. We're not saying they have to be a national championship contender every year. I have faith that they're going to be in the playoff pretty consistently. Getting back to 10 wins this year was a big deal. Obviously, it was 9 in the regular season, but I mean, 10-3. Marcus Freeman proving that he could do it. They had Sam Hartman this year. The offense wasn't phenomenal. Was underwhelmed by the hire. I'm excited to dive into some stuff this offseason, see where things are. But yeah, by and large, I think that they can consistently, win, 9, 10 games. And then back for me would be essentially they need to make the playoff every year since it's 12 teams and then eventually be 14 potentially. They need to make it every year. And then, I don't know, man. I think back potentially similar to Penn State where, every maybe 3 to 4 years getting up into that quarterfinal, semifinal conversation. I mean, they're a big enough program. They got the big boy pants on. That would be me getting close to graduating them like we're doing with Michigan and Texas is them, kind of getting consistent with the playoff and getting, winning some games in the playoff and not getting embarrassed when they get there. So that's going to be, they've got some road to hoe again in front of them, but certainly on their way.
Yeah, I would say so. Notre Dame, again, I have it 4, but they've dropped over the last few years for me because, dude, you look at Brian Kelly's record 10-3, 12-1, 11-2, 10-2, 11-1 before leaving. Now they've gone, 8-4 in the regular season, 9-4 at the bowl game, 9-3 in the regular season, 10-3 at the bowl game. They consistently play a pretty good schedule every year. People who say they're overrated don't get it. They play a decent schedule every year. But for me, what's back for Notre Dame? I agree. I think I've landed on because they've made the 14 playoff and because they've shown and they played for a BCS national championship in 2012. I think 25% of the time they need to be in the semifinal game. So like competing for the playoff every year, even if you don't make it some years, like, oh, you were 13, you missed out because you're not in a conference and 9-3 didn't do it. Like one out of every 4 years, not just being in it, but winning 2 games in the playoff and getting to the semis. Like that's consistently back for me. So maybe that's like the playoff 3 out of every 4 years, and one of those runs you make it to the semi. That would be back for me for Notre Dame. So I've got them at 4. Again, 8-4 is not bad. 9-3 is not bad, but to me less consistent than obviously Michigan, Texas, Penn State, and then right there in a tier for me, a tier above Tennessee, because again, I'm like Tennessee needs more consistency. Again, like they've had the 75 pop with 10 wins, come back down to 8-4. Notre Dame had like Brian Kelly at 11 wins, first year of a head coach 8, second year 9. So like, okay, like the bottom didn't fall out when it definitely could have that first year. So yeah, I've got them at 4 to complete my tier 2, and for my who's back. Okay, so we've both got 5 teams now. I'll go to my 6, and this is now completing tier 3 for me. So tier 1 being Michigan and Texas, tier 2 being Penn State and Notre Dame, tier 3 Tennessee at 5, at 6 USC. So like USC and Tennessee, very similar to me. Like Tennessee, it's like, hey, at least you won the big one. You know what I mean? Like last year you beat Alabama. But then again, it's like the inconsistency of you beat South Carolina, you're in the playoff, and you blow that game. USC just blew the Heisman Trophy winner for 2 straight years. And like what people are calling one of the best QB prospects to come out in a long time in Caleb Williams, because you didn't want to hire, or not even to hire. I think at this point it's pretty clear that it was Lincoln Riley. and the way they practice and the culture of the team is a problem.
Yeah.
They're going to change that this offseason, apparently. So for USC, back to me, is competing for national championships. So similar to Notre Dame, I think making the semi 1 out of every 4 years consistently and like
Yeah.
competing for national championships, winning the Big Ten like 1 out of every 3 years. Like you're in a big boy conference now,
They're
but
a big
like
dog.
you're a big dog. I mean, like who
That's a national
in
brand. That's why they're on this list. I
yeah,
agree. I have them
in
6
the
as well.
yeah, like in the Big Ten, who should be winning the conference before you, or like who's on your level or better? Ohio State, Oregon, Michigan, and that's the list. And Oregon, you've kind of let sneak up on you because they've just got the Nike money and they're building something. And like that is it. Those are the only teams who should be doing more than you or on your level consistently. So yeah, I don't think it's asking much to be like 1 out of every 3 years. You got to be winning your conference. That's the expectation at USC.
Yeah, they're Southern California. There's money there. They have what many have tabbed as one of the top coaches. Remains to be seen. Some things have gone up and down. They've got the flashy coach. Is he the right coach? They got
Yep.
the flash rather than the, what they previously had with Clay Helton. That they had a little uptick last season, and then this past season, exactly. I mean, you said it perfect, Jacob. They squandered having the Heisman and just generational type talent at quarterback these past 2 seasons, and having what many have esteemed is the best play caller in the game and the Heisman maker and all of this stuff. It's like, okay, great. He's going to be the number 1 overall pick this year in the NFL draft. What do you have to show for it? And that Alex Grinch defense that we've looked at for the past couple of years, they brought in some recruits, some transfers, all kinds of stuff, and it's not translating. It's exactly what you said, Jacob. The culture, there's some sort of issue that's being missed at USC in that at a minimum at the Pac-12, they should have handled it in such a way that like, yeah, if Oregon beats you or Washington beats you because they've just got a better team this year, because they both had good teams.
Yep.
You live with it. But you've got to show that you're solid enough to handle these. They had too many embarrassments throughout the year where even in wins, they were squandering leads or just having terrible tackling on defense, or, the offense would turn the ball over. It's one of these things where, all right, you've lost Caleb Williams. Where do you go from here? I agree with you. They're a big boy. For them to be back, and we're going to be hard on them. They're a big boy. They've had a great, rich history, and that hurts them. They had that run in the early 2000s, Jacob. It was like when you and I both fell in love with college football. I thought they never lost any games. That was my impression of USC. And now looking at them, yeah, I mean, they're just another team. And if you're young enough, you don't know them too much different than UCLA. You're probably like, oh yeah, they're probably both pretty good from that same area. And that should be offensive to every USC fan. We'll see where things go. Lincoln's a young coach. He's had some experience at some great programs so far. I'm not going to say he doesn't learn from it. He potentially does. Look at Lane Kiffin. I think Lane Kiffin has grown up a
Good
ton
example.
from when he was a young coach. And then now I think Lane Kiffin has really developed. It's going to take some lumps. Hopefully for Lincoln Riley's sake, he learns and he's able to adapt. That's what made Nick Saban great all those years. That's what so far has made Kirby Smart great. That's what made, all of the best in the game. Jim Harbaugh, he's been able to adapt and to make changes that are necessary to continue to grow and to be able to fit the sport and fit your culture, fit your team. You've got to do all of them. So USC has yet to do that. I agree. They're number 6. They're not the worst on our list, but they are far still from being back.
Who is your number 7?
Now, I would agree with you in the sense that there are tiers, because I do have a gap between USC and this next group.
Same.
And I almost don't care what order they go in, but for the sake of podcasting. I've got Miami next. All right.
Okay.
Miami's number 7 for me.
Same.
It's mostly due to recruiting and there being a good base of, NIL, access to players, buy-in, all that. I say buy-in, I'm talking nationally. There's nobody at the games. Nobody goes to the games, but you've got a lot of NFL players that are being part of this NIL, collective and, really put the money out there to bring Cristobal back. I submit to you the Georgia Tech game last year. It hurts my soul to there's certain little things that if they did them right, I would be really jovial and upbeat about Miami. They're still at number 7 here. Jacob, what do they got to do? Tell the people, what do they got to do? Come on, man.
You're in the ACC.
Bro.
For now.
I couldn't have said it better myself. What are you doing?
You need to be winning the conference every other season. That's what you got to do.
It's the ACC, brother.
You let little old Clemson come and take this conference by the throat for near a decade and stood by and watched. And you watched your biggest rival, Florida State, go and take a team.
They were big brother to Florida State for years.
Yep. And you just let Florida State go undefeated through the conference and what should have been a playoff berth for Florida State. Yeah, Cristobal.
They've never won the conference. They've never won the ACC.
Dude, everyone thought, and you talk about this because I was a little bit younger, but when Miami joined the ACC, it was like they're about to run this conference, and they've never won the conference. If they even played for the conference championship,
Florida State on opposite sides, so they would meet in the ACC championship every year.
And have they even played for it? Have they even played for it?
That's what I thought. They had. They played that year with Mark Richt. They played.
That's right.
But yeah,
because we had the 7 years in a row of 7 different teams won the Coastal. Forgot. Man, God bless the ACC Coastal, man.
RIP, man. Those are good old days.
I will say, what do they have to do to be back? Win the ACC every other year, and make the playoff. It's the ACC, man. You go 10-2, 11-1, you're in the playoff. So you need to be in the playoff.
Florida State
75.
leaves the ACC.
Yeah.
If Florida State leaves the ACC,
well, I got a feeling Miami will follow somewhere. I don't know if they're going to stay with, winning if that happens. But State, you're in the ACC, win it 75% of the time, win the conference half the time, be in the playoffs 75% of the time in this new era. No one's ever questioned Cristobal's recruiting. Their recruiting is on an elite level. So he is doing what it takes to win, which one of the ingredients is you have to have players good enough to win. He's done that. I guess internally they have said 2024 is the year they're building to. So this is the year of no excuses.
Yeah.
You shouldn't put yourself in a position where not taking a knee against Georgia Tech could possibly cost you the game. You shouldn't be doing that. You should be up by 21 and your fumble doesn't matter. So ridiculous that they're here. No excuses for 2024. Now,
does this feel like Texas a few years ago? Or, I mean, because I hate to even put that on them. It's almost like if Texas was a little less successful in their, because Texas had some bad years, but I feel like there was still a little bit more organization. But that's kind of what needs to happen. They've got all the raw materials. It just needs to be developed and produced. It just hasn't been there. And they've got coaches that are highly thought of. They've got recruits. They've got money. And it's just frustrating. I think that's maybe what the biggest issue is. You're just sitting here looking at, I think that's what people had with Texas. That may be the parallel I'm drawing, is that
no excuses.
It just looks like it should work. Similar to USC, and that's a lot of this list, but it's just, especially when you have that much access to that many recruits, it's just frustrating.
In your literal backyard. I mean,
and you left the Big East and came to the ACC. And I know we're talking about a decade and a half ago, 2 decades ago at this point. But come on, man. There's such a rich history, and there's pockets of the history, Jacob. We've all seen the U 30 for 30s, the part 1 and part 2, but you had your run in the 80s, and then you had the run in the late 80s, early 90s, and then you had the run at the end of the 90s, early 2000s. You've had 3 separate big runs.
Yep.
you can rehabilitate this and get back on it because
Dude.
of the access to elite players is unmatched. They are touching every one of
Dude.
those high schools has just players on play there's no excuse. The guys that they take as fallbacks on signing day could run circles around guys that are going to. We just talked about Penn State. Penn State has access to solid recruiting. It doesn't. You can't even put it in the same stratosphere as what Miami has access to.
Dude, and the transfer portal and NIL era was built for Miami, man. Like this was literally Josh Page talked about this about like, dude, the comeback home school. All these players are leaving Miami to go other places. This is the ultimate like, hey, don't you miss Miami? Come on back home.
Come back, do it for Miami. Do it for
right.
a 305. What are they doing? So we're a little harder on Miami, but
Frustrated,
hopefully the Miami fans understand it's out of frustration because
if you're a Miami fan, you
so
feel the
much
exact
there.
same way we do.
Right, right. That's fair. Maybe go to some more games, but
maybe.
you know, there's that. But anyways,
okay, that's your 7. That's my 7. At 8, Daniel, I'd like to submit an addition to the list. At 8.
Oh, that's where you're additioning. Okay.
Where do you have the addition?
9.
Okay. So, wow. Okay, I'll push back on because the flip flop.
Yeah,
I have them
fair.
in tier 4. The addition we're submitting to the list are the Florida Gators. So Florida in the category of haven't won a championship since 2010. Because to be fair, before we said 2005, now we're 5 years later when we first said that. So now 2010, Florida has the most recent title on this list, aside from Michigan, in 2008. And yeah, it's been a little while since Florida has been a little bit relevant. And what's funny is the coach they fired was the last one to have some relevancy in Dan Mullen. So he was doing okay. He wasn't recruiting well. And now Florida's not, they're not recruiting top 5. And also it's not happening on the field. And I mean, Daniel, their win total for this year set at 5.5. Like Napier's, if Vegas is right, Napier will lose his job this year. And yeah, like when your recruiting class fell apart, minus your 2 biggest gets in Lagway and LJ McCray. But again, like what is back for Florida? Back for Florida is competing for national championships. I know that the SEC is crowded, but again, similar to Miami, you are the University of Florida. You have access to talent like no other school has outside of. I mean, I would compare it to you're a tier 1 talent location in like the Miami, Florida, Texas, Georgia, USC. Like you're a tier 1 talent, LSU. No excuse to not recruit well at Florida.
LSU I would even put as a 1B, respectfully.
Yeah, they are behind everybody. Florida. Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
And like if you're Florida, what sucks now too is you'll always be most closely compared to your rivals, and your rival's Georgia. And so
your other rival, in-state, just went undefeated in the regular season and went to an Orange Bowl, and they have built it back.
Yeah,
they had a rebuild and they came back.
And I'll say, the SEC's deep conference. I think for Florida, you're consistently a top 4 team in the conference. I think that is back. Like,
yeah, I
playing
agree.
for the conference championship every other year. Like, you should be swapping with, in the old East and West divisions, you should be swapping with Georgia half the time.
Yeah.
Like, every other year, you're swapping with Georgia to win the East. And that's why I'm like, in this new era, you should be a top 4 team in the conference consistently, making the 12-team playoff every single year. Because I'm like, oh, is that too hard? And I'm like, what do you expect of Georgia with Kirby Smart right now? You're like, if they miss the 12-team playoff, it will be a huge letdown if you're Georgia. Florida is on the same tier as Georgia as a program. So
yeah,
I'm being hard and saying, if you're not making the 12-team playoff every single year, that is a disappointing season if you're Florida. So the past 2 years have been way worse than that. So Gosh, now that I'm saying all this, I might swap them to 9. To be honest,
That's why they have them at 9.
Yeah,
Jacob, look at our lists that we've made in the past. It's list season, all those kinds of things.
yeah.
The lists we've made, program lists, like historical program lists, like best job in college football.
Do you
all
remember
of
where we
these
put
kinds
them?
of things. I thought they were
I'm
number
looking.
1, or they
They
were
weren't
up
1.
there.
Georgia was 1 as far as best
Okay,
job
no.
goes.
Okay, they're in top 4. I feel
They're
like
in the top 4.
Okay,
I'm gonna find out what you're talking.
do that. But here's the thing, Jacob. People, because of how bad they have been in recent years, people forget. Even under Mullen, that year that they beat Georgia in, was it 2020? They beat Georgia in 2024, number 4. Okay, there it is. They beat Georgia in 2020. That team still only won like 8 games. I think they lost 4 games that year. It was a weird COVID year, so the records were kind of weird. But you put all that together, it's like, okay, that's your year you hang your hat on. I mean, that's a disappointment. You go back a few years, Jim McElwain wins back-to-back SEC East titles in a very underwhelming fashion, and then he gets a 42-7 loss to Georgia on Kirby's second year. He gets fired. You go before that, was a Muschamp right before that. He had one good year. The rest of it was very underwhelming. And then obviously before that was when you had Urban. It took an elite coach to get you there, but I mean the history they've got with Spurrier and like they just all those years of just the 90s and then winning championships. It's like there's issues. They've second to Alabama the amount of SEC title appearances, Jacob.
Yep.
That's the number 1 SEC title matchup. A lot of people in recent history would probably be like, oh yeah, it's probably Georgia Bama, right? No. It's Florida and Alabama.
That's right.
But we're not judging them the same because Georgia has just ascended and gotten right up there. They said, okay, Alabama's the standard. We're going right up there to them. And they've gone to catch up to them. And Florida, while like it's been disappointing to say the least. I've got them at number 9. We did add them to the list because they met some criteria for us. And since we're graduating a couple teams, we're like, hey, maybe we need to reconsider the landscape. Florida needs to get back. They had Tim Tebow. The teams of the late 2000s that they had under Urban Meyer were just, I mean, Percy Harvin, Tim Tebow. They, with Cam Newton was a backup, never got to play. Like, think about those teams and the amount of defensive stars, guys in the NFL. There's so many guys in the NFL from Florida, but they're getting a lot older. There's been a lot said recently just about the state of the program with what Spurrier has said recently, Trevor Etienne, who just transferred from Florida to UGA as a running back. These guys, there's the color commentator, I forget his name right now, from Florida just came out and said something about Billy Napier coaching for his job. I was just listening to Chuck Oliver this week, and he's, Mr. CFB, King CFB, excuse me. And he said, I think Billy's in a no-win situation because he has no metric that he could save his job with other than wins. And unfortunately, the schedule lines up that he will be fired by the time they play Ole Miss. Dude, that was his statement. I agree. He's going to be fired by that point. They have the
toughest schedule in the country.
It's ridiculous. But also, they shouldn't feel like, oh, poor us, poor us. It's exactly like you said. They should be frustrated. They have money. They have resources. They're in the best conference in college football. They have great, all that stuff. Check all those boxes. They've got a great alumni base. They have a great, a fan base that's just eager. Throw on top of it, they have NIL and then access to players. They are the only SEC school in the state of Florida. The only one. These other schools are coming down there and grabbing players. They are the University of Florida. What's going on? They've got to do better. They've got 2 championships in the 2000s.
Yeah.
2006, 2008.
They have one in the 90s.
But it has been a nosedive since 2012, they won 11 games. And they won 10 games in like 15 and 16. But they've had 4 win seasons. They've had some real stinkers. So, I mean, Florida, I agree. Back would be, for me, consistently top 4 in the conference. people talk about being a crowded conference. Florida is one of those reasons it's supposed to be a crowded conference. They need
That's
to
right.
get back. And then, yeah, I agree. They should win the SEC once every 4 years, and they should go the playoff consistently because they're Florida. And I think that they should be in the semifinal once every 4 years. I really am tempted to say more than that, but I respect the amount of big teams that are out there with the Big Ten, the SEC. I'm going to say once every 4 years. I agree. And I think they are a Grand Canyon away from that right now.
Yep. Yeah, their schedule for this year, if you haven't seen it, is they open with Miami. So I get to see my number 7 and 8 back teams go at it game one. Both,
Hey,
dude,
how about it?
think about how badly both teams need that win to like start the season up.
The amount of perception that does, like the goodwill that gets you in the state of Florida with recruits and everything. Because is that a week 0 game again?
It's week 1, but
Okay. Anyways, keep going.
and it's in Gainesville. So Miami, Samford, whatever. Texas A&M in Gainesville at Starkville. UCF, you better not lose that one. At
Brother.
Tennessee, and then here's the run. I mean, Kentucky. Then 4 weeks in a row, 5 weeks in a row, you've got Georgia in Jacksonville, at Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, at Florida State.
Yeah, if
Good
you
luck.
lose those 3 right before Ole Miss, I agree. That's the nail in the coffin. Because LSU is, I mean, being able to recoup their program after, having a couple down years with Edo and then being right back there with Brian Kelly. Like that should be the biggest slap in the face. Florida looking right at a team like that. That's another, you could call them a rival. I mean, they are a rival, but another team that they try to see eye to eye with, like they do with Georgia. And they've been looking up to LSU and Georgia, and that doesn't even get to like Alabama and these other teams that are, just in the conference and ahead of them.
Right.
That's going to be rough. It's a rough stretch.
Okay, last team on my list, number 8 on your list, Nebraska. I might switch them honestly after knowing what the ceiling is for Florida. I might be with you on Florida being 9, but Nebraska,
Yeah,
because what's back for Nebraska? I'm a believer the ceiling is significantly different than what it was in 1995, whenever they made their last championship. So, like for me, what's back for Nebraska?
Right? 95, 96.
Right. 94, 95. So,
okay.
96 was Florida. Yeah, Florida's 96. But Nebraska, I'm like, the support is there. Access to talent, not as much. But again, I'm like, I think that's diminishing in 2024 because of how connected the world is. Like,
it's true.
I mean, I'll say, look at Georgia. Georgia just had the number 1 class in the country. And they think they had 2 of the top 10 players in state stay home and go to Georgia. Like, Georgia's recruiting nationally. So, what's back for Nebraska? I think of the new Big Ten, consistently a top 6 program in the conference. Yes, I'm like Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, USC, Oregon,
Washington.
That's where I'm like, Washington, Nebraska, like Wisconsin should be like that next kind of grouping. Like those are the 5 teams that I'm like, for sure you should be behind. The other ones, to me, like what's Washington have that Nebraska doesn't? Other than I guess Seattle might be cooler than Lincoln. But you've got a good coach like Matt Rule. Let's look at year 2 this year. Year 1's been historically bad for Rule, but then he builds year 2 at all 3 stops. That's what the first 2 stops, that's what he's done. So curious to see it. The playoff, maybe 1 out of 3 years in the playoff, 1 out of 4 years in the playoff with Nebraska.
Which again,
so
it's a 12 team. It's not asking much. It's not asking much to either be one of the 3 automatic qualifier from your conference or one of the at-large. Like you can get there,
Yeah, it like with the 12-team playoff. To me, if you're 9-3 in the SEC or the Big Ten, you are firmly in the conversation. You might miss out at 9-3, but you're going to be in that top grouping of 15 teams that is going to be talked about. Like you might be the one that gets left out because of the G5 team that gets to get in, and is ranked
Right.
21st, but they end up being 12. So, like, I think if you win 10 games in the SEC or Big Ten, you were in the playoff. Like, you're a
Yeah.
lock at that point. Like, historically, if you look at the playoff rankings to this point, if you're 10-2 and in the SEC or Big Ten, you're like, honestly, most conferences, you're firmly in the conversation. You're firmly a top 10 team at that point. So, yeah, like 8-4, 9-3 consistently to me would be like Nebraska's getting back. So I just think the ceiling's changed, which is why I agree with you. I'm going to go ahead and move Nebraska to 8, Florida to 9 in their own tier of tier 5.
And, just as far as, Nebraska, you talked about the national recruiting. Obviously, Rule in year one notoriously has a rough first year while he's getting things in order and then projecting to the next year. I mean, they just brought in Dylan Raiola, legacy at Nebraska and heralded recruit, number one quarterback, number one, by many of the scouting databases and everything like that. And so there's definitely some optimism there, and seeing that pop in year two, yeah, I agree. We have less of a ceiling for them to get to where they need to go, and I don't think that they have as far to go, obviously, as Florida does. But we're really going to have to see. They've been through some stinker years from the consistency of I can't believe what Bo Pelini and Christ and all those guys they were looked down upon because of what the 90s were, and they've just whittled their way down deep into this hole, and they're trying to dig out of it now. So,
Right.
Nebraska, phenomenal fan base. They love the Cornhuskers. This is, they're great for college football. To get back, they got some work to do, but they're not last on my list.
Love it. So you've got, let's put the notebook away. Michigan, Texas, graduating. Tennessee,
Yes.
Penn State, Notre Dame, USC, Miami, Nebraska, Florida.
Yes.
And I've got same thing. Michigan, Texas, graduating. Penn State, Notre Dame, Tennessee, USC, Miami, Nebraska, Florida. So honestly, I mean, once again, the three teams that we debated about last year, the same three teams we've debated about this year, which is Penn State, Notre Dame, and Tennessee, which is fun because, again, it's what are the ceiling of those teams? And honestly, that's what the disagreement is the ceiling and what
we
should
have
be
different
expected.
expectations. Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Which is fun. I think this is a fun exercise. If you're just a college football fan and you're an Alabama fan, ask yourself, what is your expectation of Penn State? What is your expectation of Tennessee? It's a fun conversation to be like, okay, where should they be? Where are they?
Perception versus reality. Do some digging. Penn State had 2 national championships in the 80s. Where
That's
have they
right.
been since? Lots to consider.
That's right. I love it. We will be back here on the Extra Point. Be sure to follow Daniel on Twitter/X. I don't think I can ever call it X. I think it's going to be Twitter
Just stick
forever.
to Twitter. It's fine.
Yeah. It's nothing like taking a brand that everyone knows and changing the name just because. When you got money, I guess. Be sure to follow Daniel on Twitter at Deep South Daniel. You can follow me at Jacob Carnes with the K. You can follow the Extra Point on Facebook and Instagram at the Extra Point Pod. Oh my gosh, I did that in the wrong order, and now I'm thrown by the by the outro. Anyway, we'll see you next time on the Extra Point. Take care. I did it at a